Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. A couple of days ago, I saw a few articles about a Texas mother and her high school son. Apparently, they were looking over the books that her son received, and one of those books was the World Geography book by McGraw-Hill. And they noticed that that book contained a major error in it. And it's not just some ordinary error, something like a typo or anything like that. It dealt with African American history. There was a section in the book that was all about immigration. And this book contained information about the Atlantic slave trade. And instead of really describing the reality of slavery, this section of the book referred to Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. It referred to them as workers. It described them as if they were essentially like immigrant workers. That's what it was implied in the language. And I'm just going to read the language so that you'll have the exact language. So it said the Atlantic slave trade brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. That was the language that was used in this textbook. That type of language completely negates the reality of slavery. It doesn't describe the horrors of slavery. It doesn't describe the conditions of slavery. You would think that these were just some migrant workers coming to America in search of a better life. When the fact of the matter is, millions upon millions of African people were kidnapped and brought to America. They were held in bondage. They were sold like chattel property, like cattle, like a horse or a goat or a sheep or a cow, a donkey. In fact, they were treated worse than the animals. The brutal reality of slavery was just basically blotted out in that world history book, that world geography book. Our whole history was basically denied and brushed over, glossed over the suffering of our ancestors, those who were beaten, raped, stripped of their humanity. Their suffering was basically negated and wiped out as if it didn't even happen. That text basically can be compared to people who deny the Holocaust. Our Holocaust, our suffering as a people is always negated. It's always brushed aside. We're always told to forget about it, get over it. But the suffering of others is always highlighted. We're always taught never to forget. When it comes to the Holocaust in Germany of the Jews, we're taught never to forget. When it comes to 9/11 in the United States, we're taught never to forget. When it comes to Pearl Harbor, we're taught never to forget. But when it comes to black people, it's all about just get over it. When the reality is that we continue to suffer from racism that traces all the way back to slavery. When the reality is that the mental and psychological damage that we still deal with is a direct result of slavery. When the fact of the matter is, millions of families, white families, benefited from the suffering of our ancestors. And we are behind in the race for excellence because we were held back for centuries under slavery. But yet they just want us to forget about it. They just want us to forget about it. From what I understand, recently there was some news about the Obama administration helping to get reparations for Jews who suffered during the Holocaust. But no one has made any effort to get reparations for black people who suffered under slavery, who were worked from sun up to sun down without any compensation, who were beaten, raped, abused, lynched, castrated. All that pain is just brushed aside. See, this is what happens when you depend on your enemy to educate your children. This is just one small example of our history being blotted out, of our suffering being denied and ignored. This is just one example. There are so many examples of our history being completely wiped out. It is in fact foolish for us to depend on our enemy to educate our children. Obviously, your enemy is not going to give you a knowledge of your history, a knowledge that would benefit you. Obviously, your enemy is not going to give you the kind of knowledge that you need to become empowered as a people. We need independence. And that's ultimately what we need. But as long as our children continue to go to these schools that we don't control, that we don't, control in terms of the curriculum and the textbooks, we don't control the production of the textbooks. As long as we don't control those things, we need to have more parents like this woman in Texas who had the courage to speak out and demand change. And because of her courage and because she was so outspoken, they have made the change to that textbook so that it does take into account the issue of slavery, so that it is more accurate and more thorough. Because in that same book, they talk about how indentured servants weren't paid, and they were talking about white servants. That book was more concerned about the plight of indentured servants who were white than it was about the plight of African people who were denied their basic humanity, who were stripped of their human dignity. But this is what happens. And this kind of stuff will continue to happen as long as we are dependent on our former slave master to provide us with the kind of education that we need. This is why it's so important that we supplement our children's education by teaching them at home about their history, by teaching them the things that they need to be independent and self-sufficient. But again, I just want to say that as long as our people attend these schools, we need to be vigilant and we need to demand that the truth be taught in these schools, that the truth be included in the school books. So I just wanted to share those thoughts with you, and I welcome your feedback. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.